Good evening, everyone. I am Jane Kallir, director of the Galerie St. Etienne, as many of you probably know. And I would like to thank you all for joining us here this evening. I'd especially like to thank our two panelists, Sue Coe and Stephen Eisenman. Sue Coe, as most of you also probably know, is one of the most, if not the most important artist activists working today. Hi, Sue. And Stephen Eisenman teaches art history at Northwestern University. He shares many of Sue's activist inclinations and is, among other things, the co-founder of the Anthropocene Alliance, a nonprofit that specializes in environmental justice. Stephen and Sue have collaborated on a number of projects, most recently the pamphlet American Fascism Now, which you see as our title image on the screen. This webinar is an extension of our current Sue Coe exhibition, It Can Happen Here, which runs through December 30th. And if you haven't seen it, I would encourage you, if you're in New York, to stop by the gallery. We do, because of COVID rules, require advance appointments, but we seldom reach our full capacity. So we hope to see you in the next days and weeks. It Can Happen Here was conceived before the pandemic, and its orientation, its historical approach, and its contents changed as events evolved over the course of 2020. But the core idea, which did not really change all that much, was to take a look back, going back to the start of Sue's career in the early 1980s, and to see how bit by bit American democracy has progressively been eroded up to the point where, to some of us at least, Donald Trump doesn't seem so much to have been an aberration as a continuation of trends long in the making. Before I start our conversation between Sue and Stephen, I'd also like to say to all of you, we will be taking questions at the end. You can always type in your questions at any point in the conversation using the chat button at the bottom of your screens, and I will then deliver your questions during the Q&A period. So my first question to our two conversants, Sue and Stephen, we talk about rebuilding democracy, but the question really begins with what is democracy? How would each of you describe that concept?
I'll go first then, Jane. Thank you for the introduction and welcome to everybody. Bless you for signing into this. And it will be hopeful. We're going to try and make it very hopeful, so don't worry.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just have to say that because I feel despairing, and I'm not going to share that with you at this time. So we're going into what democracy is, and we live in a corporatist democracy now. I never thought we'd celebrate electing a centre-right government, which we managed to do over a proto-fascist government. So there's corporatist democracy that we live under, which is hardly any equality for the mass of people. It's ruled by a minority. And then there's socialist democracy that, in a sense, I grew up with in a different country, which would mean deregulation. To me, definition is deregulation of all major corporations, and put them in control of the people. So all the major sources would be power, energy, transport, healthcare would be run in a socialist manner. So that would be socialist democracy, which is vastly preferable to corporatist democracy, which is vastly preferable to proto-fascism, which we just missed having inflicted on us. Stephen?
Yeah, democracy is a very radical concept. It was one that the founders of the United States avoided to their best ability. They preferred a republic, a representative government, and moreover, a republic in which only a very small number of people had the franchise, had the right to vote, property-owning men. So our country hasn't been a democracy ever. A real democracy is one that goes by the motto, from each according to their ability, to each according to their needs. We're very far from that, but we have over the decades and centuries made certain steps toward that. The creation of a social security system in the 1930s, Medicare, Medicaid in the 1960s, Civil Rights Acts, these have moved us closer to a democratic system, but we still have a long way to go. So I would say that what is democracy? Democracy is an aspiration that many of us hold. It's a goal that's still very far away.
So let's talk a moment about the F word, fascism. Christina, you want to change the images for us? So there's been a lot written, what is fascism? Is fascism something that is particular to the circumstances of the early 20th century in Europe? Was Trump a fascist? Without going too far down that road, there is little argument that he was an authoritarian and would-be dictator. And there are a lot of things that he managed to do in these last 4 years to weaken whatever remains of America's intrinsic democratic system. Would either or both of you like to speak to that for a moment?
I can just talk about the artwork first, Stephen. And
okay, why don't you
I saw this was in the first year, I think, of Trump's regime, where he spoke to Boy Scouts. And they were all cheering for him with the slogans. They're supposed to be non-political. And it was really reminded me of something, the uniforms. It was very unpleasant. And the other piece of artwork is he's accusing Americans of being anti-fascist. And I presumed we're supposed to be anti-fascist. This is a calumny. And as for the definition of Trump, I know one when I see one, and he is a fascist. I absolutely know this. So that's why Stephen and I sorted out the pamphlet, because we didn't want a crude historical analogy to Germany. But before that, this is a particular American type of fascism, which Stephen can speak of.
Right. Yeah, the thing that's so remarkable about Trump is that he turned back to a kind of fascism that America countenanced in the 1920s and 30s and also before. As you all probably know, in the wake of World War II, the proto-fascist or fascist movements in the United States, for example, the speeches by Father Gauguin, who gave rapidly anti-Semitic and racist speeches on the radio and had an audience of millions, and Lindbergh, who was America Firster, started a group called Committee for America First, which had millions of followers who tried to keep the United States out of World War II and to not confront Nazi Germany. And of course, he was really a friend of Nazi Germany, Lindbergh was. But in the wake of World War II, those movements began to look like aberrations, and most Americans rejected them. So at that point, the Ku Klux Klan was pretty much crushed. The American Nazi Party was pretty much crushed. It revived itself in the late 50s and 60s briefly, the John Birch Society, another very far-right movement. But in the course of the 60s, even through the terrible Nixon and then, to me, worse Reagan administrations, there was the shying away from any language that sounded like fascism or Nazism, the militarization of everyday life, the destruction of the bureaucracies which helped to make government run, but which should be relatively independent. The bringing in conformity, as Sue shows it here, where everyone has to salute the leader, so the cult of a leader. All that was revived by Trump. So it's inevitable that anybody looking on would say, well, this is language we've seen before and heard before. And indeed, the language of America First was used by the Ku Klux Klan. It was used by the America First Committee in the 1930s and 40s, and it now has been revived by Trump. So I think the association with Trump and fascism was inescapable. And Sue had the ability and the courage to highlight it in ways that people who don't know very much about this history can easily understand. Sue, is that part of your goal in these images, to make images to somehow translate these abstract ideas of fascism into a language that a broad audience can understand?
Yes, I mean, that's very much why I'm doing the woodcuts and mostly lino cuts, because it's very old world technique that's quickly understood by people. I'm not showing off any particular art skill. It goes right to the content, and it's easily mass distributed, and it comes out really well on a backlit screen, which we won't go into. But yes, that was my curiosity. I mean, we can discuss the McCarthy hearings a bit later on, but that's definitely going to be coming up in these images.
Yeah, well, the next image deals with another adjunct to the mechanism of fascism, which is the role that racism plays in cementing divisions within society and keeping one class of people subordinate and subservient and unequal. And these are two early Sue Coe paintings, which show us, particularly traffic violation on the left, that a lot of what we have been seeing today, which has been brought to our attention by BLM, is nothing new whatsoever. Sue, do you want to begin by talking about these paintings and when you painted them, how you painted them? Yes.
The police state came from, this is a Margaret Thatcher era, and I was working on the South African apartheid in South Africa. And we went to a big demonstration off Trafalgar Square, which was where the South African embassy was. And for the first time, we got kettled. That was the word then, kettled. So they trapped us, and there were police horses, and they started, we couldn't escape. Even though this was a peaceful demonstration, Thatcher came down hard on this. She was, well, we won't go into Pinochet in Chile and the Chicago School of Economics, but she was keen on getting rid of any resistance, absolutely any union. She busted the union, she privatized, she sold off public property. This was the first, Thatcher was the first monetarist privatization of all the people's, what belonged to people, including our right to demonstrate. So I came back home, which we managed to survive being kettled. So they really trampled us down. And then I painted that night, police state. And then a friend said, well, you're showing what's happening in South Africa. Why don't you show what's happening here to African-American people? So I did the traffic violation. I've seen this quite a few times. Steve, remember when I took the photographs by the side of the road of the cops had pulled over an African-American man, and it was horrible. Anyway, I got photos of it. But I wanted to show this is happening internally and elsewhere. This violence is being imported in everywhere. So I did those two in response. Stephen?
Was it specifically the one on the left, a response to the Rodney King assault?
No, this is way before that.
Right. Because it reminds me of that so much, because you see this, and of course that's what happened to Rodney King, and it triggered off the insurrections in Los Angeles. And I was in LA at the time. I've forgotten what year it was now. I was in LA at the time, and it was a funny thing because during those, I call it an insurrection, it's almost as if time stood still. I remember on a main street in Pasadena, California, traffic was driving the wrong direction on the road because people were so desperate to get home. They were so afraid that what might happen. And it just reminds you that police states like this, states of what Carl Schmitt, the German Nazi philosopher, called states of exception, when the police are granted special powers, everything seems to kind of freeze up and stop. I think you've captured this idea in the black backgrounds and the white highlight forms.
Jamie just said on the screen, 1992.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
Jamie.
But
Jamie.
Hi, Jamie. Thank you.
Thank you. You captured this idea of a kind of frozen moment by having the spotlight come down. And so everything else gets kind of blocked out and you have to focus on this one thing. I think when there's a disaster or a crisis like that, you tend to look at this one element and everything else becomes invisible. And so I think that was kind of effective here.
Thank you.
So, of course, as we know, one of the major racist themes in the Trump administration was anti-immigrant. And these are images in a way that speak for themselves, but why don't, Sue, do you want to again kick off the conversation?
Well, I don't know children. I'm not around children and I can't draw children. This is a big weakness in doing this work. So I am not Katie Kollwitz, who could draw children perfectly. They're not furry and they don't have 4 legs. So I'm really it's problematic for me, but I try. And when the children were separated, I just remember thinking, they're not going to keep any records. They're not going to keep any records of where their parents are. I knew it. I knew it the second I heard it. And sure enough, 536, which is children, are now lost. And from their parents, this is human rights violation, flashing. I mean, part of the fascist definition to me is just sheer cruelty that doesn't have any logic. It's just cruel. And that was
it's a political tactic as well.
Stephen Miller, to be precise, political tactic, just pure cruelty and crude bullying. That's, see, I get it out with the art. This is all I've got. Sorry, I was getting depressed there.
You did a really smart thing in the print to the left, American Concentration Crush. A couple things. One is that the words have that kind of lightning strike thing, like the SS insignias on a Nazi uniform. So it does recall the kind of corralling of people, Jews, Roma, gays, etc., in concentration camps, and with barbed wire and all that. And then I just remember something else, is that I remember when Bush, in response to the 9/11, started Homeland Security Department, which of course ICE is a branch of. And so you'll remember this too, I'm sure. When they announced they were going to start this Department of Homeland Security, like we both, I'm sure, like took a grip on the chair and said, Homeland? Like since when do we have a homeland? The Nazis have a homeland. They have a Heimat. It's a German word for Heimat. So we're gonna have a Heimat here in the United States, and so this does not bode well for the future. And this is the kind of logical conclusion, or the illogical conclusion of starting a Department of Homeland Security, is to protect us from children from Mexico. It's just astonishing. Horrible.
Yep, well said.
Yeah, you know, when we did our sort of run through of this event, one of the things that we were talking about, or you were talking about, Sue, is empathy and the idea that you have empathy for all living creatures, which I think shows up, you know, very much in all of your meat work, Christina. Yeah. But if you look at a work like this, which I really think is one of your recent masterpieces, you see very clearly, it's not just the animals. There is a continuum between the workers and the animals. There is a continuum between adults and children and other living creatures.
Yeah.
I did one before this. It was the North Carolina chicken packers fire. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Where the boss didn't want the workers, who were all, the actual floor workers were African-American women. He didn't want them stealing a fried chicken. So he locked 3 out of the 4 fire doors. And they all died. The humans. They were worth less than a chicken. And that sums up this as well. This is a slaughterhouse in Newark, New Jersey. And it was a commission for the Jewish Museum on authoritarianism. And authoritarians say they are only animals. And that's the beginning of the slaughter, because who is the animal? And the workers here, and I know they have choice. The non-human animals have no choice. They are bred to be slaughtered. That's it. The humans have slight choice to work there or not, very slight. And in this case, you know, in terms of meat packing, it's horrendous. This is a horrendously cruel system, which is funded by taxpayers' money, the meat industry. But all the time I'm in the slaughterhouse, when I'm in the slaughterhouse, I'm a broken person already. And the artwork is just about the breaking, is reconforming the breaking, so there could be hope. And this is what, the only reason I am hopeful is this work and work like this, not just by me, but many artists, create vegans. And a vegan is different from plant-based diet. A vegan is abolition of all animal use. And we've made thousands and thousands of vegans in the world, and who've made others. And this is now a global movement that is changing food. It's changing how we see the food supply. It's immensely hopeful. When I see the world now, I can go anywhere and say, oh, take me to where the animal rights people live and the artists. Where do the artists live? And you'll be safe there. You'll have some safety. So this is beyond hopeful. How fast this has gone. It's never fast enough, but it is happening because of all these groups and all these activists that aren't artists. These are frontline volunteers that stand outside slaughterhouses, that rescue animals, that go into these places. My friends that do this, but just because it's the right thing to do. And they don't have the artwork to be able to sort out the broken parts, but they just do it. Stephen?
I was just thinking about how I became a vegan in large part by seeing your work. I went into the Galerie St. Etienne, and I'd never heard of Sue Coe, and I wanted to see instead Kitty Kollwitz and Max Beckmann and Egon Schiele, etc. And there were all these Sue Coes. There was Procopolis on the wall, I think. And I go, what is all this stuff? And I was kind of surprised. And then it happened that you were there that day. You were giving a little gallery talk, just by coincidence. And you gave a talk, and I felt really terrible. I felt really guilty afterward. And I thought about it, and then I kind of became a vegetarian, and then ultimately became a vegan. But I think it's the association of this body of work with work that was produced in Germany in the teens and 20s prior to the rise of fascism that really makes the connection between what happens in slaughterhouses and what happened in the 1930s and 40s.
Well, Stephen, remember the maps you gave me? The death camps were the same design as the slaughterhouses.
Yeah. Well, a number of people, including Goebbels, his family worked on farms, slaughterhouses. They knew about this. They knew about the system. They knew about the Chicago ways of organizing slaughterhouses in Chicago, and they wanted to follow the meatpacking industry's layouts when they designed concentration and particularly the death camps. So there is a direct connection. I have to say, and I'm sure our audience some of them will shrink at this. And J.M. Coetzee, the great South African novelist, has written about this extensively, about the parallelism between, and the dangers, if you will, the parallelism between slaughterhouses and Nazi concentration death camps. But I have to, the connection is quite historically strong. And when you begin to recognize the sentience of animals, their sensitivities, their feelings, their capacity to feel pleasure and pain and fear and love, then the connection between cruelties to humans and cruelties to animals is simply inescapable. And so, I no longer really shrink from making those associations, those connections. I kind of have to make them. And Sue does so, of course, in the style and form and the words she uses in this. Sue, by the way, I wanted to ask you, did you go into this slaughterhouse when you?
I did. I spent a day in this slaughterhouse.
And what year? When was that? This last year?
No, this is an image I've done over and over and over again. Right. Because I was a day there. Usually I'm not a day in a slaughterhouse. I'm just a few hours. So this one, I memorized every part of it, and it's the one that comes up the most in my work. Right. And I watched 150 animals being slaughtered.
Wow. It must be.
And they're sheep and goats, and they cry like babies. You would never discern the difference between their cries from a human baby. And they have to have those tags in the ears to be transported in the United States, but it's completely unnecessary, and it should be ended today, yesterday. It should be ended, it should be over. And it will be.
Right.
I mean, just the fact that if you become a vegan, it's 70% less food carbon contribution, if you can follow that. You're 70% reducing your food carbon footprint.
Right. You said something once that was, since Jane suggested we be a little bit hopeful, you said something to me once that really stuck with me. You said, in 30 years, eating meat will be like smoking cigarettes is now. There'll still be people who do it, but it'll be kind of frowned upon, and you'll be kind of forced to do it a little bit in the shadows, and it'll be on its way out. And I think that's probably right.
When Sue mentioned, the impact of eating meat on the environment, that sort of leads us to our next sort of subject or work of art, which is, you know, the interconnectedness of all things, not just animate life, but the planet. And this is one of a series of works that Sue did after Hurricane Katrina. Global warming, the increase in flooding, coastal erosion. I mean, there are so many ways in which all of this is woven together into a totality. Sue?
Yes, I was
Yes.
just reading the message. Thank you.
Yes,
Well,
messages are distracting.
I did this just to record exactly what was happening and the neglect again of the federal government to help people. My sister in England was actually thinking of coming over and rescuing people. She saw it on TV so many times. She said, I can come over and just rescue. And this is, I'll never do another drawing like this again, which I said before, because takes too long. And because of the technology now, it doesn't work on a backlit screen. Graphite doesn't, and you can't scan it. It keeps reflecting. And then you can't photograph it without a genius photographer. So much as I'm in love with drawing to this level, it's now everything has changed, and hopefully I can change too. And there's a certain beauty to this sort of work. It's slowing time down. So when one is assaulted by a tragedy of this enormity of people being abandoned, drawing slows it down in a way that you could think you can help. So on the roof, it was, please help us. And I sort of thought I was doing something to help, which of course I wasn't. But so no, I can't slow time down anymore to remember. I have to do much faster work. So that's cutting into wood or lino. Stephen?
That's really interesting. So drawing is a slow process, but the subject matter feels like it's an urgent one. And so you see a kind of mismatch, is that right?
Yes, it is.
Huh. But artists have always, I mean, Leonardo made cataclysm drawings, as you know, where the whole world seems coming to an end. And I guess he must have been just as painstaking with his silver point. I think those drawings were made in silver point, as you. But I guess he didn't feel, they say about Leonardo that he might have been slightly autistic or else sociopathic, because he sometimes didn't seem to register that people suffered or experienced pain or hunger or other weaknesses. So maybe that allowed him to show those cataclysmic drawings without feeling the impact of what he was doing. But for you, it's just too. So while you're drawing, it's just patient. Is that it?
I mean, also Leonardo had a housekeeper. I don't. So he had the luxury of slowing time down whilst he wrote the list of food for his housekeeper to go out and get. But, you know, apart from being a genius. So drawing is slowing time down to help one understand it. Right. And that works then. But today, Leonardo would have to have a photographer to photograph the work, or a scanner that wouldn't reflect the silver point. And so he might, I don't know, but I can't do this anymore unless I go senile and I have to watch Fox TV in a nursing home. Then I might get out the pencil again. But no, it's going to be, and also I can do it. Wait, I can do it. And I can't do carving to any, you know, the carvers I'm looking at, Dr. Eric Avery and Huck, they're geniuses, you know, and I look at that work and I think, I'm 50% behind them. So you've got the challenge of the puzzle of printmaking and how to, and they're they're geniuses. I'm not. So it's a worthy goal to keep trying. Does that explain?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I had actually hoped with this image and then moving on to the next one to talk more about the environmental impact of all of this.
Right. Well, I mean,
well, I'll just go through these, and then Steve, and this is his area of expertise, he can talk. So wet markets, we don't know coronavirus came out of a wet market. We have no idea until I was just talking with Judy and Tom today. We have no scientists, science-based. We have no idea until we get the lab the lab logs of the Wuhan lab, what they were doing with SARS in that lab, which our government funded. We have no idea. So I'm not so certain it came from a wet market. It very well could have. The origins are exploitation and abuse of animals. That we know. The middle one, coronavirus, I really love this one. This is very, very good art. Most of my art isn't very good. It's passable. It's okay. This is good. And it's good. It's just good. Then this one, this is all the different diseases one can get from consuming meat. And I did talk to you a couple of days ago about avian influenza. Is now going through South Korea. I told you it was spotted in the UK. Now it's going through South Korea, which means depopulation, which means culling enormous amounts of animals. So it's again, we must be the stupidest species ever in history because we keep repeating the same pattern over and over again just because it gets an instant profit rather than thinking long. I mean, I'm not thinking long term like the Central Committee of the Communist Party with a 10-year plan. I'm thinking about a 6-month plan. How about having a 6-month plan to stop the spread of these viruses just as we're in the middle of this virus? How about that? Is that too much to ask? No. So meaty bacteria, making it very simple. But it's a complicated subject. You know, when I looked at the DNA that my friend Tom sent me of the virus, I thought this can't be, I don't get it, because there was hardly any pangolin. There was a fragment. So I get all involved in the data. Whenever I do anything, I research it and research it and research it. Then I have to throw it away to do the artwork. But I've got the background. And with this topic, I'm in the middle. So I'm not throwing anything out, just to let you know, not that you care, but I'm in the middle of research and then I'll forget it. It's gone. And then I have to do the art. Stephen? Environmental, go ahead.
I was just going to say that with these and then the previous image, can you go back to the previous image, Christina, for a second? Thank you. Together, they show how these crises are one crisis. So, you know, the pandemic resulted probably because certain parts of China were deforested, and in order to raise animals and crops to feed animals, and that the wild farm interface became one where bats and pangolins and other animals could move over into the area where domesticated animals were and spread disease. So the deforestation, which causes climate change because we no longer have forests to absorb the carbon, and we have more runoff from water, and we have more technology using fossil fuels to run these gigantic farms. So all of that causes climate change, global warming, increased hurricane strength, increased flooding, which in turn creates people who must move to other areas of the country. So you have refugee crises, you have racism where people are unable to move to areas that are safe any longer. So, you know, you have one crisis compounding and cascading and leading to the next one. So the environmental crisis, the climate climate change, the pandemic, economic inequality, racial violence. These are ultimately all one crisis. So, for an artist who's a politically engaged artist, you need to, as you do, Sue, move from one thing to another, but always keep the idea that they're related. So carnivorous and coronavirus shows that in a phrase and in a pair of images. And the image of the previous image of Hurricane Catherine shows the racism, which is an environmental crisis, as well as a individual rights crisis. It's a global crisis. It's a crisis of power, of violence. So I think it's a necessary and really difficult project to bring all these things together in a body of works. So I always learn new things from looking at them.
So now we'll move on to the next image. This is the most hopeful image in the group. This is hot off the presses, literally. Sue just finished it today. And a vaccine is in sight.
Well, I mentioned the McCarthy hearings before, which is, Roy Cohen, obviously, with McCarthy. Roy Cohen was Trump's early lawyer. And now these creatures who are absolutely despicable bullies, liars. You only have to see them on that committee to see the stench of the corruption in them. And guess what? They get elected. So I'm just out to get them before they get the planet. And my friend Judy Brody just said this in an off sentence when she wrote, I wish there was a vaccine against fascism. And I thought it was brilliant. So in terms of the work process, it's my friends sharpen up my work. They're so necessary for me in terms of activism to bounce ideas, especially with Stephen too. Well, I'm trying to do this, which is the way to do it? And bounce ideas backwards and forwards. And Peter Brandt, incredible lawyer, and Gary Francione. And, these are brilliant people and beyond my ken in terms of intellect, but they followed my work, even though they're not artists, they can know how to plant some seed or sharpen some idea. And so it's so wonderful to have friends that understand and are supportive. It's the most wonderful thing in the world. So actually all the work is done for activists, my friends. It's done for my friends. There's no greater whole world. It's just done, if Jane likes it and Faye likes it, it's such a thrill for me that just so the people I know, if they like something, it's nice.
So how do you know when you're making a work, or do you know when you're making a work that's supposed to have an immediate punch for like that week or that month? And how do you know, or do you know, if you're making one that should have a lifespan of a year, 5 years? I mean, Marcel Duchamp thought all works of art have lifespans of one kind or another. So do you think some works have a 5-year lifespan, some are a 50-year lifespan? Do you make that calculation when you're starting something?
Hildegard, who was director at the Galerie St. Etienne, she said, brilliant woman, the most brilliant person I've ever met. She said, art doesn't happen until the viewer says so. So whatever the artist thinks, or the artist's ideas of longevity or instant impact, it doesn't mean bupkis. All that happens is the viewer says, yes, that's working for me, or that could be working for me in 20 years' time. The artist, or I, speaking for myself, I have no idea. And that's, the gallery forced me to go on Instagram, and I'm looking at the comments and I think, why do you like that one? Why over that one? So it's really interesting to see what people are responding to. And from my impetus, my fuel is I read massive amounts of material quickly, and then I will focus on this is important. So vaccine this week, this is important. And we would have a vaccine against fascism. But as you said, Stephen, you know, would it be effective with people that have already been infected? Would it be valid for people who've already been infected? So, you know, and then it's a print, which puts another puzzle to it, because when you try and do their faces, it's back to front. But it's thrilling to do this. It's just, it gets it out of your system nearly to get them. Go ahead, Stephen. Do you want to say more?
I remember one time you told me you were working on something in your studio, I think, and you looked at me and you said, "It's just great being an artist." Because I said, "Well, how do you make those things?" So you made some animal. I have some of your works on the wall here, and they're just so uncanny, the resemblance and the expressiveness. So how do you do that? And you said, "I can just do it." I said, "Well, it must feel great." She said, "Oh, it feels wonderful to be an artist." That was so nice.
It is. It's, even if you've never done art before, please try, because, you know, some teacher at school might have told you can't draw. That's not true. Everyone can draw. It's a beautiful thing. You can draw a greeting card. You can draw for your friends. And before you know it, from Robert. Oh, hello, Robert. Oh, he says that's hopeful. Okay, good. It is. It's just such a way of handling this, the pandemic too. Even if you don't think you can draw that day, you can just put down a color that means something to you. Just keep a book and put down marks or just anything, and then you'll see a pattern to it. You'll see a pattern, something developing. Don't let people steal that away from you. You're human. You can make art. Any more hopeful?
Well, I think it's time to move on to more questions from the various participants. So this is going to be our final image. This is actually part of a billboard project that Sue was asked to participate in. And I think that this billboard is still up. Faye, if you remember the address in Brooklyn where there is, if you could type it into the chat bar for the panelists and people can go and see this. But to start with questions, and you can continue, you know, to write your questions on screen, and we'll try to find time to address most, if not
that
all
was John
of them.
Carlin, Jane. John Carlin just wrote, and he founded Red Hot and Blue. Talk about, you know, a superb activist, organizer, that changed the face of HIV in this country. Hello, John. Where are you?
Well, we've got a lot of friends actually who, you know, your friends, old friends who are connecting with us today. We also got emails, and I'm going to start with something that came in an email. This is from Kathy from Seattle, who owns your painting, It's a Jungle. You might remember, do you remember her?
Of course, by Kathy. I remember It's a Jungle. That was New Musical Express.
Real Comet Express, she says. New
Musical Express, Kathy. Oh, look.
Well, okay, so here's her question. First of all, she says she admires you enormously. We all admire you for doing what you do. Oy vey. Okay, we won't go there. She asks, how do we listen to each other instead of demonizing one another? So many voices are crying out to be listened to and incorporated into solutions for a future. We have a long, hard road ahead of us. How do we heal this polarization and dissipate the fear blanketing us? Imagining actions that can flip the future. It's so easy to fall into despair in these lockdown times. It goes far beyond getting Trump out of the White House. So.
Well, in my work, I try and demonize the structure, not the individuals. And it would be very easy for me to say, well, meat packers are evil, they're killing animals. But it's not so easy when you're in a slaughterhouse and you see them and you talk to them. So the beginning, we do have language, and that would be the beginning of communication and listening. And some things, like the rise of fascism, should absolutely be demonized. I don't believe, Kathy, we're as riven as is being said. I believe if the structure, it changes, people go along with the positive, but it's very much the top-down structure dictates our behavior. So I'm attacking the economics is the enemy, how the economic structure is creating this, not the humans within the structure. So that's where we need to focus. Stephen, can you say more?
Yeah, so I disagree slightly in that I always want to speak about the word political economic, because economics always arises in the context of struggle over power, a struggle over resources. And that struggle is always a political struggle, not purely a mathematical back and forth that certain economists will do as to supply and demand. So it's always a political struggle. So I agree with you broadly, but I would emphasize that. And the other thing is that it really is a question about demonizing, because obviously you do feel it's necessary to demonize people who are demons, like Trump or like Pence or McConnell. And so you need to name who the bad guys are and do so in a language that people can understand. And calling them demons or devils is a way to get that across. But I also agree with Sue that we may not be quite as divided as people say, and that when we call him, you know who. My sister used to just call him Hitler, but now I just call him it, and Sue calls him Thing. When Thing is off the stage, out of the White House, people may begin to settle down a little bit, and all the antagonisms may begin to mellow out a little bit. We're hopeful.
Well, this speaks actually to another question in the list here from Dara. And obviously we have seen a lot of groups organizing in these last 4 years as a result of Trump. Right. There's BLM, there's Me Too, there's ERA Now. Do you think that there is this is the question, do you think that there is a possibility with people like Kamala coming into the government, that the government can actually begin to effect meaningful change in response to these social justice movements that are beginning to gather more momentum?
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah, I mean, the danger is that people will say, oh, we got Trump out of there. Oh, sorry, I shouldn't use the word. We got him out of there, and now we can just settle back. But now is when the real work has to begin, to make sure that Biden and Harris's feet are put to the fire, and that the social movements continue to grow. We were worried with it in the White House. We were worried that social movements would simply be crushed, just like a fascist dictator does. They just destroy any opposition. And
he did try to do that.
Right, absolutely, he tried. So now he's out of there. We can, I think, hope at least that people can freely protest, express their views, and maybe push the government to actually do something.
I've got a couple of technical questions, which I've sort of tried to answer in the chat, but I'll also put them to Sue. One is, they're both about process. One is, do you draw the images on the block or the linoleum before you start carving? And two, could you speak a little bit about the various, what should we call them, little colored signets that you carve and put below the prints in the drawings?
You know, that's when I most ask questions, along with, are you a vegan? Or how do I join the Communist Party? Or what are the little stamps for? It's the most asked question. I get the block, whether it's wood, which wood has a memory. So I like to print the wood first to know what the wood is saying. So it's covered with black, and then I use white I start to draw. It's a pretty accurate drawing, and then I carve it. Same with the lino. I start from black, it's white line cutting. The little stamps, we started out because my work was so unsellable. I can't tell you how unsellable. Now it's slightly sellable. When it was so unsellable, and it's black and white, and it's content people don't really want to see. So I made lots of little animals to put on the stamp so it looked nice. That was all.
Okay, this is actually a question for Stephen. This is from Diane in Evanston, Illinois, and she is a local political activist. And she writes, our city is losing its racial diversity very fast because of escalating city taxes. The Black community is being forced to leave the city, and that's in large part because the university pays zero taxes, federal, state, and city. Would you be willing to support the fight for Northwestern to pay their fair share of taxes?
Absolutely. I mean, Northwestern has a responsibility. It's gained tremendous amount from the city of Evanston, and it gives very little back. And they have an obligation to educate the children in Evanston, to make sure the kids who are college age, who are Black or poor or underserved, otherwise underserved, should get to go to the university for free in Evanston. They should pay taxes in Evanston. They have an endowment of $13 billion, and they ought to pay their fair share. Absolutely.
And Stephen took on Northwestern about vivisection, for which they would have fired him, except he's tenured. Right. So he's always taken them on.
Yeah, they're mad at me about a lot of things.
Okay, now this is from, can't quite tell. It says Star Drucker, and then it's signed Rain Drucker. Anyway, she's part of the Drucker clan. Nina, Star, and Eric. She says hi. But she also wants to know what words of wisdom or encouragement you have for young artists coming into their voices in this historical moment. How do you see the landscape of political art changing in the near future?
Okay, this is my pathetic little advice, but I would say to young artists, do forensic research. So you research everything you're drawing. So it doesn't have to be social political, but let's say you're standing in a park and you're standing on a foot or 3 feet of grass. You draw everything in that 3 feet. You find out how many species are in that 3 feet. Or you stand on a street corner for 3 hours. You make a sketch every minute. So you come home, you'll have, I don't know, have 60 times 3 months, 180 sketches. And you look at those sketches and you see which is the one that sums up that, and it will have every single political element in it that you might not have perceived before. So it's a way of seeing. And I'd also recommend John Berger. Brilliant ways of seeing, which is very easy to understand with pictures, and just a brilliant testament of how to understand how we're looking at something. So draw, record, make sure on that 3 feet of grass you've covered every insect, every type of plant, every little molecule down to the last molecule, and then you can see other things. So that would be my humble advice. Not to, I need to do something on healthcare, Google it and just get the same recycled, cannibalized images, but have the confidence to go out, because you are the vision. As a young person, it's your vision that will come to the fore. So get away from this screen and go outside and draw. Is that good? Is that all right?
Good. That sounds good, Sue.
I
Okay,
just thought of it in a second.
the next question, actually, this is two very similar questions related from Kate and Mark. How do you deal with all of this horror around you, immersing yourself in such devastating subject matter? And is there anything that you do sort of, I don't know, for them, this is Kate's words, for self-care, to deal with your empathy fatigue, or do you have empathy fatigue?
Is this to Stephen?
No, it's just Stu.
No, this is you, Sue.
Oh, well, since I started going into slaughterhouses at age 12 or 11, I've always wanted to kill myself. And this is hopeful. I'm going to end up hopeful here. Follow along. And now I know I can. I've always known I can. So if I'm not going to, what can I do to create change? So killing myself is just my security blanket, if that makes sense. It's, oh, you can always kill yourself. Oh, thank goodness. So, well, as I'm not going to do that today, then I might as well see what we can do to change it. And I've always thought that, like, since a child, I've always had that thought that that was my coping. That's my self-care recommendation. You know, and I have rescued, hello, they've been very quiet, and having rescued dogs in this case, but it could be anyone you could rescue. And then you have to stay alive for them, because that's my fear. Oh, what would happen to them? So that keeps me going. Stephen?
That's great advice. I don't know. I can't really add to that. The point about having the dogs there. Now, I have to say, one of your dogs, Badger Blake, he's a one tough cookie. So I think he can manage on his own just fine without you. I shouldn't say that maybe, but he's.
Yeah, he was in the shelter for 6 years, and no one chose him.
Right.
No one chose him. And my other pit bull, she's not mine, I'm hers, but she chose him. There was a good reason.
Right.
Anyway, he's very sweet. Yes.
I've got some actually less than hopeful questions coming up here, and I'm also sort of trying to roll them together, you know, so that we don't stay here all night. So a lot of harm has been done in these last 4 years, and as Tim from Los Angeles, hi Tim, old friend of ours, writes, you know, our whole media discourse has been corrupted. It was being corrupted before Trump, and then he really did a number on it. And of course, there are still many people out there who believe that stuff and who back him. How do we counter that?
Well, the fairness doctrine is one way, and the other way is to understand how that came about. Very briefly, it came about because Murdoch got Thatcher to change the laws in England, which before then it was illegal to have a monopoly over an area. So he said he would support Thatcher if he got that monopoly. And that's how he's risen to dominate a lot of the whatever it's called, rubbish. That's how he's dominated the media, by being on the cheapest tier of cable TV. So it's not that people choose to watch Fox. Fox is all they can afford. It's on the $35 a month tier. So that can be very easily changed. That you know, to be a news organization means to actually report the news, and truth is the vaccine. That's truth. That's something that we can change very quickly. And yes, and you can see in this election that the social media overlords have applied some more discipline in labeling false information. So I think that's critically urgent to be dealt with. Stephen?
Yeah, I'm not that hopeful, except insofar as the present occupant of the White House was defeated. And there's something about defeat that destroys an aura of rhetorical invincibility. I think back to the 1930s and 40s and Nazi Germany, when a whole nation believed in bizarre conspiracy theories about Judeo-Bolshevism. And the only thing that shook them out of it was the defeat of the German Wehrmacht at Stalingrad. And all of a sudden, seeing their own children coming home dead and food shortages began to break the spell that Hitler had cast over the country. It was too late to save the 6 million Jews who were killed and the many others who died in concentration death camps, but it did shake them. But in small, in miniature, in this country, destroying or breaking the thrall, the power of those who tell those big lies will go a long way toward breaking the trance that large numbers of people have fallen into.
And the other danger of that is neutrality, because the BBC was incapable of fighting off the lies of Farage and the Brexiteers, because they had to have neutrality in as much as they treated the opposition as a legitimate voice. So there's a moral equivalency there that went very badly wrong. So that's the other danger in the neutrality, because this isn't neutral at all.
One other thing I would say that is hopeful, and that is that in this last year, for the first time in my life, and I've been watching presidential elections since Kennedy, I was a little child then, but I saw it, the first time the media has called out the president as a liar, repeatedly. So unlike, say, Mussolini's Italy or Nazi Germany or Pinochet's Chile, etc., the media has not been throttled. He wanted to, and he calls them the enemy of the people, but he wasn't successful. And so that gives me hope that as sold out as many of the corporate media are, they nevertheless were willing to stand up and call out many of the lies.
Yeah.
Well, I think that is a good, hopeful ending. I like that. And I would like to thank you both once again for joining us here this evening. I'd like to thank Faye Duftler and Christina Roman for their work behind the scenes. And I'd like to thank again our audience and all of your wonderful questions. I'm sorry if we didn't get to all of you, but you can email us, you know where to find us. And I hope that those of you who haven't seen the show will come in and see it before it closes on December 30th. So good night.
Right, thank you.
Good night. Thank you.
Thanks for coming.